So welcome. I'm Megan Dugan-Bassett, Senior Policy Manager at Women Employed. Thanks so much for joining us for a follow-up call with Chris Kuberski of Rend College. If you joined us for the first part, our webinar, Making Change Real, thanks for joining us again. And if you're new, welcome and thanks for participating. Before we dive into our conversation with Chris, I just want to go over some housekeeping items really briefly. You guys know this is a conference call, so there's no webinar login. You're on as you should be. Our conference call system is a little sensitive to noise, so if you're interrupted and need to do something while you're on the call, please remember to mute your line. And if you get an urgent call and need to put us on hold, that's fine, but if your organization has music for people on hold, I ask that you hang up and call in again when you're finished. Otherwise, it makes it difficult for everybody to hear what's going on. This is an open question and answer session, so I'm going to introduce Chris and open the discussion with a little background information. But then feel free to just ask your questions over the phone line as we go along. And I know we have a few more people who will probably join us. If you need technical assistance, if there's some kind of problem with your connection, the best thing to do is to contact ReadyTalk directly. They have fantastic customer service. And their provider is, or their number is 1-800-843-9166. That's 800-843-9166, and that's ReadyTalk. You can also try emailing me. I do have my email open, and it will pop up. I can't guarantee if we're in the middle of the conversation I'll see it right away, but I can definitely help if I can. So I know the people at Danville know about Rend Lake, but Rend Lake College is a community college located in southern Illinois. And I have to say I'm always impressed by the exciting things that come out of Rend Lake, and their work in developmental education is no exception. Ms. Christina Kuberski is the Vice President of Academic Instruction at Rend Lake, and in that capacity she's been closely involved with Rend Lake's system of tracking developmental student progress and working with faculty teams to continually improve their developmental education programs so they can really be meeting the needs of the students that are coming in their doors every year. I was really excited and impressed when I found out last year that they had this tracking system that really allows them to get a good sense of which changes are really making an impact for students. As you can see from her bio in the original invitation that you should have received, Chris has been in the trenches, and she has really earned her stripes. She has taught for a number of years in a variety of areas, including developmental, so I really consider her an expert. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Chris, can you start? I don't know, I think everyone probably was involved in some way in the webinar, but would you just give us a little snapshot just to set the stage of what you guys have done at Rend Lake in terms of developmental ed? I mean, just very briefly, like, what your current system is, how long you've been working on it, that kind of thing.
Developmental ed was restructured in the early, about 2000, 2001. It had been a separate unit, and then it got merged into liberal arts and math and sciences, so the math developmental classes are housed along with the transitional classes, and the same is true for English and the study skills class. When all of that happened, we were really working on assessment and trying to figure out ways to assess student learning, and that's really where the cohort idea started. We wanted to be able to track those students and not only see if they were successful in the college prep courses, which we refer to, college prep is our developmental or remedial classes. And we also wanted to be able to see then how they fared when they went into the first transfer level class and whether or not they ever completed a certificate or a degree. So we worked with our IT area programmers to develop what we call the cohort tracking system, and it allows us to identify any of the students that are enrolled in one of those college prep courses, and they become part of that cohort, and then we are tracking them for 4 years. And so every semester after the drop date, we create that cohort, and then we look at it at the end of each semester after grades are posted to see what the completion rates are, the success rates. We define success as getting a C or better in the college prep course or the transfer level course. And then we also see whether or not students are completing certificates or degrees. And nationally, the 3-year or 150% is what is used to track those students. We used 4 years initially because we have seen that even in that 4th year, we're still getting a stronger percentage of completers than what you might guess. So that's kind of what we used as our target. And we've looked at this 3 years as well so that we're looking at what nationally is accepted. But we just kind of wanted to see where those students were tailing off and what was happening to them, if there was any specific time that we really were losing them. It seems from what we've gathered that after that first semester, that's kind of a telling time. If they don't come back for that second semester, they don't reappear later. But we also saw that some of the students who, may have 3 levels of math, they continue to persist and actually do complete. So a lot of it's based on the student's motivation, I think. In tracking the cohort, I think really what we were looking at is trend analysis, and it takes 4 or 5 years before you can really start to see trends. And that's one thing I talked about in the webinar. Our trend analysis indicated everything was improving, and we were starting to see kind of a pattern every 3 years of students coming in a little lower, and then the next year they'll be a little higher, and the next a little higher, then repeat that pattern. But, in 2011, we saw it working in the opposite way, and so that hit our radar immediately that, hey, something's not working the way it has been. What's going on? Are the students different, or, are we not meeting their needs? And so then at that point we started talking, basically asking those same brainstorming questions that we had asked in 2000, and now we're in the process of, I call it phase 2, changing the curriculum, changing the supports, changing some of the other things that we believe are no longer meeting the need of this particular group of students. The demographics have changed.
And Chris, can you say a little bit more about how you've kind of figured out what you wanted to focus on or what you wanted to change based on those changes in student numbers?
Well, I think it was conversations that were occurring all over campus, and they all kind of settled on one thing. The math faculty and the English faculty look at the curriculum itself, the content. They work really closely with the transfer level teachers. In English, the English faculty teach a college prep class once every couple years. And in math, they do the same thing. So they're in tune to the population, I think, because of that. But they really focus on the content and, whether we need to integrate more lab time or, compute. They use My Math Lab, My Foundations Lab, so those kinds of things. But beyond the initial classroom, we also were having conversations around campus about retention and persistence, and the students' motivation or lack thereof, and just how this group of students, the millennials, are so different than students that we saw 10 years ago. And so out of those conversations came a lot of discussion about student support. We're implementing a first-year experience. We're piloting it in the spring, and really we're moving the college prep study skills class out of that requirement, and we're embedding it in the first-year experience so that all of our students will have those study skills. And so just different things like that, I think really it bubbled up from faculty expressing needs. They're not feeling like their students are getting what they need to. The learning isn't occurring in the way that it used to, so what can we do to meet the needs of these students?
That's great. I'd actually like to open it up to Danville, if you guys have any questions.
Well, actually, we didn't, our developmental faculty member, I think, participated in the webinar, but Dave and I didn't participate in the webinar.
Okay.
But we're just interested in knowing what Rend Lake is doing because certainly developmental education is an issue for us as well. I'm curious, I guess the one question I have, when you moved from a decentralized to incorporating it into the liberal arts and the math division, what about your procedures in terms of placement? Have you changed those?
No, that did not change. we're talking about it again in light of the park, but we haven't changed our placement scores since probably they've been steady for at least 20 years now. So none of those things changed. Processes, procedures really didn't. It was more reporting structures as far as who the faculty reported to and who scheduled the classes, and then being able to share faculty that in better ways, I think, were the positive things that came out of that structural redesign.
Sure.
Did you face any opposition? Were there any people who weren't very interested in doing that or thought it was a bad idea?
I would say the faculty that were, completely developmental, they weren't, faculty don't like to have to report to someone new. That's always a challenge. But the person who had led that division or that department retired, so it kind of was a natural progression. It wasn't, something that was done because it wasn't going well. It would just made structural sense to do that. And after we started working together, I think they began to see that there were a lot of advantages and a lot of conversations about what was expected in those transfer level classes that they had not been a part of before. So ultimately, they were very excited about it. But it took a while.
Well, I'm kind of curious. And I'm wondering, since Dave and Alice weren't in the webinar, if you can share a little bit more about some of the changes you have made to DevEd since 2011.
Okay. Probably in the math area, the incorporation of my math lab, and we had in-class tutors prior to this fall. And the in-class tutors worked with the students one-on-one in the lab setting to work problems. So the faculty member and the tutor were in the classroom helping students somewhat in a tutoring scenario. They were working problems. They would still have homework, but they were actually working the problems in that classroom at the time of class going on. When we pulled the tutors out, primarily because of Obamacare and not being able to monitor that time as appropriately as we needed to, so now you're either a faculty member or an adjunct, or you're a tutor. So we don't have those lines crossing over. We're not sure yet how that's going to work. From the student's perspective, I don't think it's drastically different because we have more tutors now in our Learning Enhancement Center, and they see a consistent face when they go over there, which was not the case before. So from the student's perspective, I don't know that it's a lot different. From the instructor's perspective, they lost a helper, and so that was met with some resistance, but they also understood that it was something that was done for reasons outside of our control. It wasn't what we wanted to do, but it was something we felt we had to do because of watching the hours of adjunct. So that was one change. In English, we are piloting this fall a section of the combining English and reading, so they're not two separate courses. They're one course, and it's integrated. The students who are in that particular class, that will fulfill their remediation requirement if they pass with a C. But they're also allowed to take one of 4 identified courses for college credit. I know Intro to Sociology, Social Problems are 2 of those courses. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the other 2 are. But instructors helped identify courses where they thought a student with that kind of support could still be successful. The reading requirement wasn't extensive compared to some other classes, and the writing component was more reflective than research-based. So we're just trying that out. I ironically just came from a college prep meeting, and the English faculty reported that most of the students who have hung on this far are getting B's or C's, and that's what she also sees in her more traditional English and reading separate classes. So she feels like it's meeting that need. She hasn't been able to find out yet how they're doing in their credit-bearing course. So that's part of what we will track with that change. The plan then is to roll that out in completely for all sections next semester.
I have plenty of probing questions, but Alice and Dave, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to jump in.
I don't have any. Dave, do you have any? No, we don't.
Okay.
Go ahead. We'll listen.
Okay. Okay. So one of the things we talked about is how important it was getting the different faculty teams on board and working together as a unit. And one of the follow-up questions that people had was whether, what was the importance of getting the developmental English instructors working together as one unit. And so one of the things you said was that a unified approach was really important, and that think tank meetings where all ideas were put on the table, discussed, and weighed against the goal was one way of accomplishing this. Can you tell us more first about how you set the goal, if it was something that was set with, with all the stakeholders, if it was something that was set by the administration, and then talk more about, how you organized and planned these think tank meetings?
I think the goal kind of bubbled up in both realms. The faculty were concerned that not enough students were completing the courses and that they weren't going on to those transfer level classes. And there was just a general concern about what are we not doing to meet these students' needs. During those conversations, one of the things that we looked at were demographics. We were trying to see if there was kind of a population that we were losing. Was it the single parent? Was it a female student, a male student? Was it a certain age group? And honestly, we didn't find any pattern that indicated that there was a target student that we could look at, to bring the supports to that particular group. Of any of the groups that were at risk, it seemed to be the single parent. But there wasn't really any significant difference in how they performed than in any other group. So that didn't really lead us anywhere, although we thought it would when we started. From an administrative point of view, I think it was kind of the same thing. The president that we had at the time had been a faculty member, and he was from the career tech area and had seen a lot of his students struggle with reading and those things, and he just kind of had a personal interest in it. So he met with the group several times, so they knew from the beginning it had administrative support and interest and concern. He was more of a listener and contributed as opposed to saying, this is what I want you to do. He sat in there and talked about different possibilities. He was as surprised as the rest of us that some of our explorations didn't lead us anywhere. So that's kind of how it unfolded on our campus, which is probably unique. I think it's more common for an administrator to say, this is not sufficient. Only 20% of your students are graduating. You have to hit this benchmark. But that's really not how it happened here. Once we started talking about it, then I don't know that initially we set a goal. We just said we want this to be better. Right now we were at about 30% of our college prep students completing either certificate or graduating, and we don't think that's sufficient. We want it to be more like 70%. That's probably pie in the sky, knowing what national averages are, but that's, we're not satisfied. 30% is not good enough. 50% is not good enough. So we're just always having conversations about how can we make it better? What are we missing? What do these students need that we can provide?
I just have to say I love the attitude that you come with, and because I think, sometimes I run into the people will feel like, well, we have to kind of be we don't want everyone, not everybody is college material, and so we kind of have to keep people out. And I really appreciate that you guys are really trying to do your best and really push yourself and push the institution and the students to get, really high percentage graduating. So I really love that.
Yeah, and we recognize that not everyone is going to get a college degree, but we would hope that they could at least leave here with a certificate and be more employable. So we want to help them with those skills for lifelong learning as well as just to complete whatever, a goal. And many of those students do have unrealistic goals. They place into Math 1401 and think that they're going to be, a scientist or something, and that may not happen. We've seen it happen, though, with a few students, so you don't ever want to write that off. Determination takes them a long way.
So I'm curious, were there particular faculty members who were really champions of some of these changes from the beginning?
The ones who particularly teach primarily developmental classes or the college prep, I think they would be the champions. They care about those students, and they aren't satisfied until the student is successful. I think there's no bigger thrill for them than to see that student cross the stage at graduation and get that degree. That's very rewarding for them, and so they were very involved in the conversations. Really, they weren't resistant. I think they would have been if it had been top down, but it was more about what do you guys think we need to be doing and what kind of supports do you think you need. That's where the in-class tutors came from, and they saw that the institution was committed to putting that in the budget and supporting it. When it was at its fullest, we were probably spending $60,000 to $70,000 a year on in-class tutors, which may not sound like a lot, but for Rend Lake, that's a lot of money. And even when our budget was really tight in 10 and 11, we didn't pull that. We wouldn't have pulled it at all if it hadn't been for the Obamacare mandates and having to make sure that part-time faculty stayed under a certain number of hours to make, because we knew we couldn't afford to provide them insurance. So.
And I'm just so were there other ways that you really gave some of the supporters tools to be advocates with their colleagues?
I think, we've created the College Prep Assessment Committee, which we talk about assessment. We talk about a lot of other things. So I think that they knew they had their deans on board, the vice president was on board, we have a student services representative in there. So they saw all of those people kind of coming together for the same cause, which encouraged them. They also have access to all of the adjuncts at least once a year at our orientation, and they have an hour or two with those adjuncts to talk to them and, share with them the strategies that are being used in the classroom, new curriculum or whatever. So they're considered the lead faculty, and I think that empowers them to have those conversations and feel like that they're kind of in charge of it. And so the combination, I think, was what really spawned them. Also, in English and math, they meet with the other faculty that teach the transfer courses. They're considered in the same group. They're not considered separately. So they had the buy-in of all the full-time instructors, not just themselves, when it came to making those changes. And it was a conversation that was discussed at English meetings and math meetings, not just college prep meetings.
And I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit more about that committee? How often do they meet? Are there specific projects that they work on? How does that work?
We meet at least once a semester, sometimes more depending on what's going on. We're doing this year's our program review year, so we'll probably meet more often. But the kinds of things that we talk about, we share with that committee the current placement scores and test rates and the demographic information as that becomes available. We look at the cohort report at that meeting and talk about it, what it's telling us, what kind of things that we may need to do to improve those results. We also talk, our adult ed director is a part of that group, and so we talk about bridging between adult ed and college prep and then on to transfer level classes or credit-bearing classes. Our student services person is there who is also an advisor, so she gets to take that information back to the advisors as to, what's this new class, for example, this English and reading combo class, what that really is like and why it's, schedule the way it is and what it's going to do for the student. And so we really try to talk about all those kinds of things so that then people can go out and share it with their areas so everybody's well-versed in what's going on.
So I'm also curious, some of the things that you've tried, have they started out as pilots and then been rolled out campus-wide? And how do you kind of make that transition from a small pilot to, a campus-wide initiative?
Most everything that we have tried, we have started as a pilot. I'm a firm believer in piloting something and seeing if it's going to work or not before you roll it out and then have to pull it back in. An example of that is we call it Prep 1404, and it's the classes combining the English and the reading. So we have one section we're piloting with the full-time instructor, maybe two sections. This semester, we've talked about it with at Student Learning Day. We talked about it to all the faculty. We've talked about it with the advisors. We have a high school counselors conference this week. They'll hear about it. So just trying to let everybody know that this is the new English and reading requirement. It will be in the catalog for fall registration. We don't have as many sections in the spring, so all those sections will be 1404. We've talked to our registrar and financial aid about how that will work for a student who may be failed English and reading, and now we're going to move them into this 1404 class, what that's going to look like and what we need to do on their transcript and with, their GPA or whatever to make sure that that flows okay for that student, particularly with financial aid. So just trying to make sure that as we're piloting, we're seeing the hazards or what might cause a problem and coming up with an answer for that small group before we roll it out for the masses.
And I'm curious to know, do you guys, so then as part of your process, if you've tried a pilot and it's working very well, is that something that faculty vote on, or how's the decision made to take it campus-wide?
I wouldn't say it's really a faculty vote, but because usually the faculty that are piloting it are the ones that saying we should move, or this isn't going like I thought, we need to rethink this, or we need to try it again with these tweaks before we roll it out. So the faculty are either pushing it or saying no, no, no. And that's who we're listening to, because typically they're the ones that created the concept for the pilot and sold it to their dean as, can we try this? And that's just through conversations and dialogue, discussions, and meetings. Usually when the faculty has, in the English case, the faculty member wanted to try it. She's done a lot of research about what's going on nationally, and she had come across this concept and wanted to see if it would work. So she asked last spring or last fall if that was something we would consider. We said, sure, that sounds like a good idea. Let's try it. And so it got in the schedule, and she's the one that's monitoring it, watching the success, watching the trends of the students in that class, reporting back. And, she's already talking about how she's going to train the adjuncts for fall when there's so many sections, and who she wants to teach it of the pool we have right now, who she thinks can adapt and who she thinks can't. So she's very involved in that. So that pilot, the outgrowth of the pilot is probably more based on her pushing it and her giving her stamp of approval than it is the dean saying, we're going to do this.
All right. Any questions from Danville?
No, thank you.
Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't, rushing on to the next question, not giving you guys a chance. So I'm curious about one of the questions that had come up in the webinar that we ended up getting an answer for later because we ran out of time, was about the role of professional development and training for faculty. And you had said this was a really important part, that you'd sent faculty to workshops and conferences and that you were feeding them information, whenever articles or reports were crossing your desk. And I'm just curious, one of the things you talked about was encouraging faculty to visit other institutions. And I'm just curious, what was the role of that? Did a lot of faculty visit in other institutions, and was that helpful to them? And, how did you kind of bring that information back and integrate it?
At the time that we were initially restructuring, there were 2 or 3 faculty who were especially interested and curious, and so they kind of each picked a school that they were curious about. They were Illinois schools for the most part, or else they were, within driving distance of where we are. So I think one of them may have gone to Missouri. I can't remember the actual school at the moment. But they kind of did some research. They looked around on the web and found some things that they were curious about, made some phone calls, and then decided if it was worth following up or not. So, and we told them kind of, you each can go one place, bring back the information, and share it with the group, and then, so they had created a list of questions that they all ask at each institution to cover the different areas, and then they kind of compiled that, examined it, talked about what they liked, what they didn't, tweaked it to fit Rend Lake, and then the 2 administrators, myself and the Dean of Math and Sciences at the time, we also did that. I think we went to 4 different institutions, and we traveled together, but we split up. She went to the math, and I went to the English and reading areas, and then we asked questions and delved in from that perspective so that we would cover a lot of material all at once. We also were looking at physical space and how they had arranged it and where the faculty were located and things like that. And the faculty probably didn't really look at the facilities. They were just more looking and talking about the content areas. We also became part of NAID. We sent at least one of our faculty members went to NAID. Some of them went to some other conferences that were based on College Ready, College Success, that were close by. So they kind of picked the ones that they wanted, and we were able to sponsor one of them to go to a national conference. But that was the only person who wanted to go, so it kind of worked itself out.
Okay. I'm curious about one more thing. So as you've made changes in the classroom and in the curriculum, are those things that have you made changes that would actually impact, like, specifically how things are taught in the classroom, or are they more structural changes and then the faculty kind of take them and decide how to apply them in their classroom?
I think it's probably both, because part of what we changed was the incorporation of my foundations lab, my math lab. So incorporating computers into the classroom in the lab shifted how they taught, and it also shifted the facilities usage that they needed and how we had to schedule things. So all of that kind of created some scenarios that we had to work out, particularly with identifying the computer labs and having the classrooms in there for at least an hour a week. And then some of the rest of it was, okay, we're going to emphasize critical thinking became one of our emphasis, so because we saw that our students going into English 1101 were not able to think critically enough to manage the writing assignment. So critical thinking became more of a focus in that reading and college prep English class. So that was more, this is the skill that they need. These are the resources that you have. How are you going to address that? And then the faculty figures that out. With the combination of English and reading in one class, the faculty member said that it's a real paradigm shift for her, and she's what I would consider a very well-versed full-time faculty member. So we know that we're going to have to do a lot of training with those adjuncts before they teach a class so that they can make that shift as well.
Okay. So we're not talking about a faculty member designing a curriculum and then having everybody follow it. We're talking about more structural changes, how it's taught, what types of the way, about the way it's taught and how, and the technologies that's used, and then the faculty are figuring out how to integrate that into their, or how they're going to actually integrate that into their teaching style and that kind of thing.
Yes, but we do have departmental syllabi. So for our adjuncts, they're given a syllabi, and these are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and this is basically what you need to cover.
Okay.
But they still have leeway to approach it their own way, but it's somewhat standardized in that regard.
And are there common midterms or tests?
In math, there are departmental finals that are the same for every section. In English, there has been an end of semester writing sample that has been the same prompt. I don't know with the new format exactly if the instructor's figured out yet how she wants to do an exit test. I think she's still figuring that out.
Okay. Are there any advice that you would give to other colleges that are trying to do this on campus, either about, how you've set up your data system or how you've worked with the faculty to develop these new models?
I think my advice is to be patient. It takes a long time for these processes to mature and for them to take faculty ownership. I think if you try to push it on the faculty, the resistance will outweigh the gain. If faculty begin to buy in and you just kind of listen to what they're saying or the troubles, and then you latch on to that and say, well, how can we help you address that? So being patient during that process. I think one of the biggest challenges that I see is once a faculty member believes that they've latched onto something that works, it's hard for them to let go of it when an outside eye see that it's not working like that anymore. So that's where we're at right now. We have faculty who believed in the in-class tutors. They believed in the workbooks they'd created. We can't do that in the same way anymore, and they are struggling to let go of that and seeing other ways to accomplish a similar goal.
Okay.
Could I ask a question about scope? How many full-time faculty do you have in developmental? How many part-time adjunct? And how many students do you serve a year?
Our students, our cohort is usually about 450 students, and that is any student that places in one or more remedial courses. Our FTE for Rend Lake is about 2,500, if that gives you an idea. As far as full-time faculty, we have 5 full-time English faculty, one of which is primarily considered college prep, although she does teach Rent and Comp 1 and 2 throughout the semester. She gets at least 1 or 2 of those in her load each year. And for math, we have 4 full-time faculty, and one of those would be considered the primary college prep. But they all may teach a section or 2. As far as adjuncts, usually we have about 20 English adjuncts and about 15 math adjuncts in any one semester. And they, depending on their expertise or their, availability, they may be assigned to transfer or college prep classes. We tend to use those across the board, so we don't necessarily have a pot that's just developmental.
Okay.
This is Alice Jacobs. I do have one question. You mentioned that you were spending $60,000 to $70,000 for in-class tutors. Do you know what your total tutoring budget is?
I don't, because that comes out of another area. We have a TRIO grant, and a lot of our tutoring is paid for out of that grant.
Thanks.
And I was just going to say, we still offer free tutoring. It's just now housed in the Learning Enhancement Center as opposed to being offered within the classroom.
Sure.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to wrap it up. We have recorded this, so we will make that available to anyone else who would like to listen to it later. Our original webinar is also recorded, and that is available on Women Employed's YouTube page, and I can certainly send you a link if you are interested. Thanks for joining us. Thanks so much, Chris, for all the great work that you're doing, and thank you for joining us and spending so much time helping us learn more about how you're doing things at Rend Lake. And feel free to contact me if anyone has any questions or would like any information on any of the other schools. We will be doing another conference call tomorrow at 9:30 with Lenore Rodicio from Miami-Dade College, and that's going to be the 6th of November, 2013. So you're welcome to join us, and we are scheduling one with Dr. Morellis from Texas State. So thank you to everyone for joining us, and feel free to contact me with any questions or ideas.